A story older than time. Long before written laws governed societies and long before science tried to explain the human mind, people told stories to understand themselves. These stories were not merely entertainment. They were mirrors, reflecting the hidden struggles of the soul. Among the oldest and most powerful of these stories is the tale of the 7 mortal sins. According to ancient Christian teaching, these sins were not isolated mistakes or single immoral actions. They were seen as deep inner tendencies, quiet forces living within every human being. Theologians believed that when these tendencies were left unchecked, they gave birth to suffering, injustice, and spiritual decay. They were called mortal not because one mistake would doom a person forever, but because they could slowly kill the soul from within. Over centuries, monks, philosophers, poets, and artists shaped these ideas into a moral framework. The 7 mortal sins became characters in sermons, villains in stories, and warnings passed down from generation to generation. Yet even today, in a world of technology and speed, these sins remain strangely familiar. They appear in relationships, in politics, in social media, and in our quietest private thoughts. This is not a tale meant to condemn. It is a tale meant to awaken awareness. Like all good fairy tales, it speaks of danger, temptation, and consequence, but also of wisdom and choice. Let us now step into this ancient story and meet the 7 shadows that walk beside humanity. Pride, the sin that wears a crown. Pride stands at the beginning of the story, for it is often called the root of all other sins. In old legends, pride does not announce itself loudly. It arrives softly, lifting the head, straightening the back, and whispering that one is greater than others. At first, pride feels harmless. It looks like confidence, self-respect, and ambition. But slowly, it grows into something colder and more dangerous. The proud person begins to believe that rules apply only to others, that advice is unnecessary, and that mistakes are for the weak. Listening becomes difficult, and humility feels like humiliation. In fairy tales, pride often belongs to kings, queens, and heroes who forget their limits. They stop seeing the world as it is and see only what they wish it to be. When pride takes hold, relationships begin to fracture. Friends turn into rivals, and compassion fades into judgment. Over time, pride can lead a person into isolation. It can destroy trust, because the proud heart cannot admit fault. It can also cause devastating downfalls, because reality eventually confronts arrogance. Many stories end with the proud character losing everything, not because the world was cruel, but because they refused to see the truth. Pride teaches one of the oldest lessons in moral storytelling: the higher you place yourself above others, the farther you have to fall. Greed, the hunger that never sleeps. Greed enters the story carrying empty hands that can never be filled. It is the sin of wanting more, not because of need, but because of fear. Fear of not having enough. Fear of being insignificant. Fear of losing control. Greed does not limit itself to money. It desires land, power, attention, admiration, and even love. Whatever greed touches, it demands more of it. And once it has more, it demands even more still. In ancient tales, greed often appears as cursed treasure or endless gold that brings misery instead of happiness. The greedy character believes that wealth will bring safety. Yet the more they collect, the more anxious they become. Possessions begin to own the person, rather than the other way around. Over time, greed can lead people to exploit others, to justify injustice, and to ignore suffering if it stands in the way of profit. Communities collapse when greed replaces responsibility. Nature itself suffers when consumption loses all restraint. The great tragedy of greed is that it promises fulfillment but delivers emptiness. It teaches us that abundance without generosity leaves the heart poorer than before. Lust, the fire that burns too fast. Lust appears in the story like a beautiful flame in the darkness. It offers warmth, excitement, and escape. Lust is not simply desire, because desire can be healthy and loving. Lust becomes a sin when desire takes control and no longer respects boundaries, dignity, or consequence. In fairy tales, lust often disguises itself as romance or passion without responsibility. It convinces people that pleasure alone is enough, and that the present moment matters more than the future. Under its influence, others are no longer seen as whole human beings, but as objects meant to satisfy longing. As the story unfolds, lust rarely ends in happiness. Relationships break apart, trust is shattered, and intimacy loses its meaning. What once felt powerful becomes hollow, and the flame that burned so brightly leaves only ashes behind. Unchecked lust can lead to emotional emptiness, broken bonds, and deep regret. It reminds us that connection without respect is not love, and that desire without care ultimately consumes itself. Envy, the shadow that watches others. Envy walks quietly behind joy, watching what others have. It does not simply want the same blessings. It wants those blessings taken away. In old stories, envy is the force behind betrayal and hatred. It turns admiration into resentment and turns success into accusation. The envious heart believes that life is unfair, that someone else's happiness is a personal injustice. As envy grows, it poisons perception. The envious person becomes blind to their own gifts and achievements. Every comparison deepens dissatisfaction, and gratitude disappears. Happiness becomes impossible because it depends entirely on others failing. Over time, envy can lead to bitterness, cruelty, and even violence. It destroys friendships and families, not through open conflict at first, but through silent resentment. The greatest irony of envy is that it harms the one who feels it far more than the one who is envied. The stories teach us that comparison steals joy, and that peace begins where envy ends. Gluttony, the feast without satisfaction. Gluttony is often misunderstood as simply eating too much, but in ancient moral thought, it was something deeper. Gluttony is excess without awareness. It is consumption without gratitude. It is the attempt to fill an inner emptiness with outer pleasure. In fairy tales, gluttony appears as endless banquets where no one is satisfied, or magical food that traps those who consume it. The gluttonous character eats, drinks, or indulges endlessly, yet never feels complete. Gluttony can slowly lead to addiction, poor health, and emotional numbness. It disconnects people from their bodies and from moderation. Pleasure becomes routine, and joy disappears. The lesson hidden in these stories is simple but powerful. When consumption replaces meaning, nothing is ever enough. True satisfaction does not come from excess, but from balance. Wrath, the fire that destroys. Wrath enters the story like a sudden storm. It is anger that has lost its direction. While anger can sometimes protect or correct injustice, wrath seeks only destruction. In myths and legends, wrath belongs to warriors, gods, and cursed heroes who allow rage to control them. In moments of wrath, reason disappears. Words become weapons, and actions leave scars that cannot be undone. Over time, wrath can destroy families, friendships, and entire communities. It often leaves behind regret, guilt, and irreversible damage. The person consumed by wrath believes they are releasing pain, but instead they spread it further. These stories remind us that anger must be understood, not unleashed. When wrath rules the heart, it turns suffering into cycles that never end. Sloth, the silent decay. Sloth is the quietest of all the sins. It does not shout or demand. It whispers that effort is unnecessary and that tomorrow will be enough. Sloth is not only physical laziness. It is spiritual apathy. It is the refusal to care, to grow, or to take responsibility. In fairy tales, sloth appears as enchanted sleep, abandoned kingdoms, and heroes who never begin their journey. As time passes, sloth steals potential. Dreams fade, talents wither, and purpose disappears. Life continues, but without direction or meaning. The danger of sloth lies in its subtlety. It does not destroy suddenly. It erodes slowly, year by year, until the soul forgets what it once longed to become. Conclusion: the wisdom hidden in the darkness. The 7 mortal sins are not ancient relics meant to frighten or shame. They are symbols of human imbalance. Each sin is a distortion of something natural and necessary. Pride twists dignity into arrogance. Greed twists security into obsession. Lust twists desire into domination. Envy twists admiration into bitterness. Gluttony twists enjoyment into excess. Wrath twists justice into destruction. Sloth twists rest into surrender. The lesson of this moral fairy tale is not perfection, but awareness. These sins remind us where the dangers lie, where restraint is needed, and where compassion must guide our choices. In every great story, the hero does not defeat darkness by denying it. The hero succeeds by recognizing it, understanding it, and choosing differently, and so, the 7 mortal sins remain not as chains, but as warnings carved into the story of humanity. They show us where we may stumble, and they teach us how wisdom, humility, balance, and care can lead us back toward the light.